The room was quiet, save for the rhythmic beep of machines and the distant hum of life happening elsewhere. Sunlight crept through the half-closed blinds, warming the cold tiles and casting soft shadows over the pale figure lying still beneath crisp white sheets. Isabella Crane hadn't moved in 6 years. Once the name behind a global fashion empire, flashing on magazine covers, whispered in boardrooms, admired across runways, she was now just another patient in room 207 of St. Mary's long-term care wing. A car crash had silenced her world in an instant. Since then, she had slept while seasons passed, loved ones faded away, and her world was managed by strangers who once called her friend. But he remained. Dr. Lucas Hale wasn't even a full-fledged physician when she first arrived, just a freshly graduated resident, nervous and unsure, assigned to the coma ward most doctors avoided. It was thankless, mostly routine, and emotionally draining. But something about Isabella had held him in place. Maybe it was the way her hands rested so delicately, as if she might stir at any moment. Or the photos someone had taped to the wall, her smiling at a gala, holding a golden retriever, arms around a team of women she'd mentored. A woman with fire, now caught in a still frame of silence. Lucas came every day. He wasn't required to. No one expected it. But he'd sit beside her bed, chart her stats, and speak to her like she was still there. He told her about the weather, the chaos of hospital life, even the book he was reading. He read her poetry, Yeats, Angelou, Frost. Some days, he just sat in the quiet, letting her know she wasn't forgotten. His colleagues teased him gently, called it his private ritual. But he didn't care. One nurse once asked him, why her? He just smiled. Because everyone else gave up. He watched the lines of her face soften over the years, saw the way the light caught the silver strands now threaded through her once jet-black hair. He memorized every slight change, however small. Hope, fragile as it was, never left him. He knew the science. Knew the odds. People didn't just wake up after this long. But Lucas also knew that medicine could only measure so much. It couldn't quantify the soul. Couldn't chart the will to return. And so, day after day, he returned, not because he believed in miracles, but because he believed in people. In her. Somewhere deep inside that motionless frame, he imagined a woman fighting her way back through the dark. And if she ever made it, he wanted the first voice she heard to be one that had never stopped believing. Rain tapped gently against the windowpane that evening, soft and steady like a lullaby. The hospital had quieted into its usual nighttime hush. Fewer footsteps, lowered voices, the distant creak of wheelchairs echoing down long halls. Lucas sat by Isabella's bedside, the same way he had every night for 6 years. He had traded his white coat for a gray hoodie and carried a worn paperback in his hand, The Little Prince, one of her favorites, according to a nurse who remembered Isabella's bedside table when she first arrived. His voice, calm and measured, filled the room. "And when you've consoled yourself, you'll be glad you've known me," he read aloud, glancing up occasionally at her unmoving face. "You'll always be my friend. You'll feel like laughing with me. And you'll sometimes open your window, just for the fun of it." He paused. The clock on the wall ticked softly. He rubbed his eyes, exhaustion tugging at him. He reached for her hand, not expecting anything, just grounding himself in the routine, and that's when it happened. The slightest movement. A twitch. His eyes snapped to her fingers. "No way," he whispered, leaning closer. "Isabella?" Then, barely there, her eyelids fluttered. He stumbled back a little, heart pounding. "Nurse. I need a nurse in here." Within seconds, the room burst into motion. Monitors beeped erratically as Isabella's vitals spiked. A team rushed in, nurses, another doctor, a respiratory tech. But Lucas stood rooted, frozen in disbelief, watching the impossible unfold. And then, amidst the chaos, she did it again. Her eyes fluttered open fully this time, blinking slowly against the harsh fluorescent lights. She looked dazed, unsure, like someone waking from a dream they weren't ready to leave. Her head shifted, and her gaze found his. She didn't look at the machines or the nurses. She looked at him. "Dr. Hale," a nurse said cautiously, "she's responding to stimuli, vitals are strong." Lucas didn't even register the medical report. All he saw was her. Awake. Alive. Her lips parted. "I know you," she whispered, her voice cracked and fragile like dry leaves in autumn. "You talked to me." He nodded, eyes brimming with disbelief and something deeper, something like joy. "Every day," he said, barely above a whisper. "You heard me?" A tear rolled down her cheek. "Your voice pulled me back." For a moment, time collapsed. The 6 long years of stillness, the doubts, the long nights, all dissolved into that one instant, the miracle he had never dared to expect. She had come back. And she remembered him. As the medical team made calls and prepped scans, Lucas stepped back into the shadows, heart racing, mind spinning. He didn't know what came next. All he knew was that a woman who had been lost to the world had just looked at him like he mattered more than anything else. The first time Isabella stood upright again, it took 4 people and nearly everything she had. Muscles that hadn't moved in 6 years trembled under her weight. Her fingers clutched the parallel bars as if they were lifelines. Sweat clung to her brow, and tears, silent and hot, slid down her cheeks. Lucas stood a few feet away, his arms crossed gently, eyes steady. "You've got this, Isabella," he said softly. 1 second at a time. Each step was a victory. Each grimace, a reminder of the pain it took to reclaim a body left sleeping for so long. But with every faltering movement, she was coming back to life, not just physically, but emotionally, piece by fragile piece. Recovery wasn't linear. Some days she couldn't get out of bed. Other days, she'd take 3 steps and insist on 5 more. Her memory was foggy at times, the days blurred, but one constant remained: Lucas. He visited even when he wasn't assigned to her care. He brought her silly magazines, played old jazz on a portable speaker, and sat with her in the hospital's quiet garden, where she'd often just close her eyes and feel the sun on her skin. One afternoon, as golden leaves floated through the breeze, Isabella asked, "Why are you still here?" Lucas smiled, leaning back on the bench beside her wheelchair. "Because you're still here." She looked away, brushing hair behind her ear. "People used to be drawn to me because of my money, my power. And now," her voice trailed off. He turned to face her, gently. "Now you're a woman who's learning to live all over again. That takes more strength than any title ever could." Something stirred in her chest, warm and unfamiliar. In her former life, she had walked through glittering rooms full of admirers, yet never felt seen. But Lucas, he saw her, the broken parts, the quiet moments, the days she hated her reflection, and he stayed. She found herself anticipating his footsteps, the sound of his laughter. His stories made her feel part of the world again, as if she hadn't missed 6 years at all. She noticed the way his eyes crinkled when he smiled, how he always gave his full attention, how he listened, not just to her words, but to her silences. One morning, as she managed 5 steps on her own, Lucas clapped quietly, his face lit with pride. "That was amazing. I think I'm falling in love with walking again," she joked, breathless. Lucas chuckled. "Walking's great. But have you ever tried falling for a doctor?" Her breath hitched, just for a second. She looked at him, really looked, and realized the man who'd stood beside her at her lowest wasn't just her doctor. He was becoming her everything. The hospital cafeteria was nearly empty that evening, the overhead lights casting a warm, mellow glow on the tables. Isabella sat across from Lucas, a tray of untouched soup before her. She wore a soft sweater someone from physical therapy had brought her, and her long, dark hair, now streaked with silver, was pulled into a loose braid. For weeks, they'd shared moments like this. Between her therapy sessions and his rotations, they carved out quiet spaces in the chaos. It wasn't about medicine anymore. It was something else, gentler. Easier. And yet, tonight, something in her heart felt heavier. "I've been thinking," she said, stirring her soup slowly, "about how strange life is." Lucas looked up from his coffee. "Strange how?" She met his eyes. "I had everything, Lucas. The company, the cars, the penthouse, and then, in a blink, I had nothing. And when I woke up, all those people, investors, friends, even family, most of them were gone. But you were there. You stayed." Lucas offered a modest smile and looked down. "You don't owe me anything for that. But I need to understand," she pressed, her voice trembling slightly. "Why? Why did you stay for 6 years? You didn't even know me." He set his cup down and leaned back in his chair, silent for a moment. When he finally spoke, his voice was low, almost hesitant. "I never told you this," he began, "but when I was a med student, my mom got sick. Terminal cancer. She spent her last months in a facility not unlike this one. But she didn't have anyone. My dad left when I was little, and I was too swamped in clinicals to be with her like I should have been." Isabella's eyes softened. "Lucas. She died alone," he continued, his gaze fixed on a crack in the table. "And I swore that if I ever had the chance to change that for someone, anyone, I would. Then you came along." The silence between them grew full, of weight, of meaning. "You weren't just a patient to me, Isabella. You were someone whose life had been paused, whose story hadn't ended. And I just couldn't walk away from that. From you." She blinked quickly, but it was no use. Tears spilled down her cheeks. No one had ever done something for her without expecting something in return. She had built an empire on contracts, transactions, and image. But this was something sacred. "I don't know what to say," she whispered. "You don't have to say anything." He reached across the table, his hand gently covering hers. "I never stayed hoping for anything. I just didn't want you to feel alone." She looked at their hands, his strong, warm, and calloused from years of work. Her fingers curled slightly around his. "I wasn't alone," she said. "Not really. You were the only real thing in that darkness." They sat like that for a long while, hands entwined, words no longer necessary. The soup went cold. The lights dimmed. But something between them had warmed into something fierce and tender, something impossible to name. For the first time in years, Isabella felt safe. Not because of wealth. Not because of control. But because someone had loved her enough to stay, without ever asking her to be anything more than human. The ballroom of the Grand Marlowe Hotel shimmered under golden chandeliers. Once, Isabella Crane had been the guest of honor at events like this. Flashing lights, red carpets, champagne toasts. But tonight was different. This wasn't about glamour or business. It was about rebirth. Wearing a deep sapphire gown tailored to her now slim frame, Isabella stood at the podium, a soft hush settling over the hundreds gathered below. Investors, former colleagues, reporters, even hospital staff, many hadn't seen her in years. Some barely recognized her. She was thinner, yes. But her presence had grown even stronger. Behind her, a large screen showed the banner for the event. The Isabella Crane Foundation for Long-Term Care and Coma Recovery. She took a breath, hands lightly gripping the edges of the podium. The room was silent, waiting. 6 years ago, she began, her voice steady but emotional, "I fell asleep, and the world kept moving without me. I lost everything I thought defined me, my company, my independence, my voice. A pause. A shaky breath. But what I gained is something no fortune could ever buy. Her eyes scanned the crowd. And then, they landed on him. Lucas stood near the back of the room, dressed in a classic black suit. No cameras followed him. No name card. Just a quiet smile, the same one he'd worn when she first took her steps again. When she first looked in the mirror and saw someone worth loving. I'm alive today because one person refused to forget me, she continued, her voice cracking slightly. He spoke to me when I couldn't speak back. Believed in me when no one else did. He reminded me that even when you're silent, your soul is still listening. Some in the crowd blinked back tears. So I created this foundation for people like me, those who are still fighting their way back to the world. And for the caregivers who never stop showing up. Because hope isn't found in headlines or hospital records. It's found in kindness. Quiet, stubborn kindness. Applause erupted. Cameras flashed. But Isabella wasn't looking at the crowd anymore. She stepped down from the stage and walked through the audience, each step graceful and sure. She didn't stop until she was in front of Lucas. I've made speeches in front of thousands, she said, eyes locked on his, but the only person I wanted to hear this was you. He looked at her, a mixture of pride and awe in his gaze. I always knew you'd come back stronger. I didn't just come back, she whispered. I became. She reached for his hand. You stayed for me. Let me spend the rest of my life choosing you. For a moment, the noise around them faded, just the two of them in the middle of a crowded ballroom, like a quiet heartbeat in a noisy world. He squeezed her hand, voice low. I didn't fall for Isabella Crane, the CEO. I fell for the woman who fought to live again. And just like that, the 6-year silence between them melted into something beautifully loud, a promise unspoken, but understood. They didn't need a fairy tale. They had something better.